do. Okay, I think we are live. Let's see the mic input there. Okay, this is part 2 of the stream I started the other day, which was a reactions to the local election results and all of the umming and ahhing and hair pulling about the proposed deal that Theresa May now wanted to do with Jeremy Corbyn, and effectively what I've been doing since then is kind of trying to look behind the narrative and so this is a theme that doesn't just go back to the 2015 general election in the UK, or merely the 2016 Brexit election. It goes back considerably further than that. Even if one goes back to the Second World War, the end of the Second World War, and the formation of the European Economic and Steel Community. Prior to that even, if you go back, you'll find articles by H.G. Wells about a chap called Mr. Streit, who proposed an EU. You find proposals for a unified Europe in Hitler's writing. But then again, even if you go back before that, to the First World War, Treaty of Versailles, you go back before that, you go to the turmoil of 1848 and the revolutions across Europe then. You go back even further than that to the the Napoleonic Wars, and then the post-Napoleonic War settlements, and it's there really where modern real politics starts, in the sense of the writing of Henry Kissinger. So what I wanted to do was, I've got a whole bunch of windows open on my computer which are beginning to clog things up a bit, and what I'm going to do on the screen here, I'm just going to come from left to right and basically say something about each window, save the link, and this is really just the notes for whatever it is I'm going to write next, and I'm not quite sure what that's going to be. I have been wondering whether there's a poem in this, or whether it actually should sort of actually get me into finishing off Conquest of Dough, and plugging some of these angles on this many-faceted thing we call life, and finish off the novel. Aligned with that, the publishing portal and the Web3 side of the working title of Objective Cunts, paradigm shifts, Thomas Kuhn and all that. Again, part of what I've been working on these past few days is getting my integrated development environments kind of up to speed on my machine. Obviously having all these windows open isn't really helping me with that either. So that's a longish introduction, but anyway, let's just kick off with the first window. Let me just get my I have a document here from the video which I did, this is part 2 of the beginning of wisdom. You can see it's not actually dragging across. My computer's not enjoying this at all. So anyway, here's this document. Oh, come back please. There we are. It's got a few links in there, but what this is the transcript, and this is what I'm after from doing this video. Is I'm going to try and keep my sentences short and clear, and work through these windows so that I've got a record of the windows I had open, because there's some interesting stuff here and some sites I've not visited before. So that's this document here, which I'm now going to just get on my other screen here. Scroll down to the bottom of the document and start adding the links as we go, and they should more or less correspond with the paragraphs and timings as I go as well. So anyway, what is the first window that I've got here open? There are a series of YouTube videos open, and here's this first one here, and this was the Channel Floor series of films. A journalist, I think she's called Caroline Cadwallader, in the Observer, broke the Cambridge Analytica story about election meddling by Russians, by the Mercers, by Bannon, by the alt-right, but this Cambridge Analytica thing cropped up, and this video, Channel 4 News, the 19th of March, highlights a kind of a sting operation on the then chief executive, a chap by the name of Nix. You can see him up here, Alexander Nix, and it's talking about psycho graphics and the use of social media to form profiles of voters or consumers, and then using these predisposed biases to message those people. Now, anyone that knows anything about Google Analytics, and anyone who has been involved in internet marketing or knows how Facebook ads, Google ads, how Siri, voice recognition algorithms work, shouldn't have been surprised by any of this stuff. What is more surprising is that one aggrieved party it should try to expose another for using these techniques, which have been well known since the 1930s, and people like Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann. Torches of Freedom. If that doesn't mean anything to any of you, look it up. Google Torches of Freedom, Edward Bernays. If you've watched Manufacturing Consent or read Manufacturing Consent, which is a book by Noam Chomsky and I always struggle to remember the other guy's name that wrote it with him. Is it Herman or something? Anyway, it's a good film worth watching. But this Analytica stuff really just brings up to date those techniques, but instead of using Rolodexes and punch card computers and what have you, we're using modern digital technology and modern network computing. And what this actually does is it means that there is more more and quicker communication, which can be more personalised, and therefore it's less of a sledgehammer to crack a nut. I mean, basically you build a nutcracker for each individual consumer, voter, etc. And with iterative processes and machine learning and what we call artificial intelligence, the possibilities of this stuff are, well, to say they're mind-boggling is to understate quite what the possibilities are. But the problem with these possibilities is, like, along with very large numbers, just the vastness and the amount of information that is potentially available is more than we can cope with. We all have different levels of information, but we filter, we make priorities in terms of what we see at any one time. Our senses work like that, otherwise you get sensory overload. So filtering and anticipating and interpreting what is coming before us, it is part of the process of thinking, and it's something that we do subconsciously, and therefore with this sort of open door that we are offering by, say, going online, or even opening your eyes in the modern world, there's a lot going on, and people shouting for attention and all the rest of it. And Cambridge Analytica is really just a small aspect of this much larger question about the manipulation of things. Now, the analogue to this was there was a lot of stuff about subliminal advertising, which was banned in the 1960s and 1970s. And subliminal advertising was flashing very quick images which weren't visible to the human, to our conscious mind, but which registered subconsciously, and therefore an advert about something would be playing, and it would play images that stimulated other thoughts that would then marry up and something, oh, I must go and get one of those. Subliminal advertising was a thing, and I contest is still a thing. It's gone on several degrees of sophistication. And Cambridge Analytica, I decided to watch these Channel 4 films and see what they were saying, and to think of them in terms of not so much of what they were saying, or that was new, as what boundaries were being guided to think about these matters. So if one looks at the stuff, it's aimed at delegitimizing Trump, of delegitimizing the vote for Brexit, and then closing off those thought patterns. I think, well, if they can do it, surely the other people can do it too. And the answer to that is yes, of course they have, and they did. In the 2017 about Conservative Party call centres who were reading scripted things to voters and misleading voters. Now, you don't hear anything about that anymore at this stage of the, you know, the Brexit fudge, if you like. So that really is what I was forming the view of when I watched these again. Now I'm just gonna, as I go, I'm not going to play specific bits of that, but what I might do is actually do a big you know, get all the transcripts together and do a big word cloud of this. I'm going to do that as I go, because if there is a transcript on this, I think there is. I'll just click here. Come on. I might actually have, because I've got so much. Right, so let's just close that window. Cambridge Analytica. Close, and have I frozen? What's happened here? We still seem to be going. Right, okay, so I'm going to leave that one open because that's my streaming window. And then let's just get this next window open here. It's going to take a little time for this. Right, so here's the reaction to the former CEO being grilled by MPs. So I'm just going to, because this was a story that went on for quite a while, if you remember. The first I heard of Cambridge Analytica was actually Sam Williamson's channel. I love his channel, and he was mentioning Cambridge Analytica in one of his early Brexit is an inside job videos, which again I'm going to revisit. So, and I'm just going to make a note here at the start of all this. Get video transcripts for word cloud. See, I want to do some textual analysis on this just to get the keywords out of Cambridge Analytica stories. So that was that one there. Alexander Nick said he was tricked into boasting to an undercover reporter working for this programme that this political strategy firm used honey traps and bribery to smear political opponents. An interesting part of that is the Steele dossier and the Russiagate thing, and the Steele dossier and its links to the Skripal affair and the mysterious Pablo Miller, and the D notices surrounding that episode, which kind of came after Cambridge Analytica. But this Alexander Nix and the boasting that he said to have, you know, that he claims to have been doing, is quite an interesting thing that occurred to me when I was listening to his explanations of what he had or had not been doing. But we'll come to another interesting part of that in one of the other videos coming up. Grilled by MPs. So let's close that one. Right, now then, this is a year, this is July 2017, okay, and this is a film by Gabriel Gatehouse. It should be Gabriel Gatekeeper. Gabriel Gatehouse. I've done another blog about Gabriel Gatehouse, and a lot of his videos about Russian meddling, and he does a lot of these stories that kind of surround the propaganda narratives. And the Russian meddling ones are really quite interesting. He's an interesting character. He speaks Russian, and I think several other languages. He did another film about the referendum or the referenders that they have in Switzerland, talking about William Tell. I will find that blog and I will put that in the thing. But he interviews the chief executive of Cambridge Analytica a year before all these exposures coming out, and that's quite an interesting thing. I mean, he asked the guy, you know, well, are you a con man? You sort of say you're saying these things one way and then the other, and you know, there's another interesting clip of an American politician that actually says, oh, well, yeah, they said they were going to help us with the Ted Cruz campaign, made all these great promises, but frankly, it was all bullshit. Actually, is that? I'm not sure if that is. There's a psychologist. I do question the motives of them. This infographic here is quite interesting. But the links will be in the description and with their titles, and you can watch them in your own time. I mean, obviously, I've formed my own kind of angle, whatever point it is that pops out at the end of this video, and SoundCloud, 4SLM. Okay, that's that there. Put that in there, and let's just get the thing here. As I say, I'm really not sure where this is going, but I wanted to just get these notes, print off the transcript then when the video processes. Come on, please. And then I can free up my processing power. Okay, special unformatted, there you go. Right, so that's that video there, the Newsnight one, which was about a year before. Let's just do this. I'm going to put that date in there because that's important. Because that story, if you think about it, it did run for a long time. Paste, go on. Right. Okay. Then what have we got next? I've got something else downloading in another browser at the moment, so right, okay, what's that? Fourier analysis and guitar jamming. That came up in my feed and I've left it here. And Fourier analysis is really very interesting because what it does is it basically is a predictive forecasting thing based on waveforms and lookup tables, and it forms the basis of a lot of climate modelling, but a lot of other modelling as well. And this is a good video which I watched some time ago. It's from 2009. It's had quite a few views. But the mathematics of modelling and predictive algorithms is based on analogues in nature, and so you have different phenomena, like say the gas laws or various aspects of chaos theory, and what these waveforms or these geometric or trigonometric sort of shapes are then mapped onto other data sets, and then the data sets are then set to run according to whatever the waveform of a particular phenomena which it is fancied kind of lines up with what seems to be happening. And this then comes to sort of fitting of graphs, fitting of shapes and forms, and we're going to come up in a minute to van Neumann's elephant. And so this video here is kind of a bit out of sequence. I'm just going to put it in here, but it's relevant to van Neumann's elephant, which at this stage may or may not mean something to you, but it will do in just a little while. Fourier analysis and guitar jamming, 60 symbols. It's quite interesting to, you know, I had a look at that one and was sort of pining for my sound modelling days, which is, put it this way, it's much more fun than modelling public opinion. So there we are, that's that for analysis. U1, that's the one there. Okay, and then what do we have in the next window? Right, the next window here. Okay, that's my YouTube channel and suggested things to watch. So what have we got? I haven't watched that yet. Apocalypse Now, Real versus Fake. That's Windows on the World. That's an interesting question, and here we are. Tommy Robinson attacked on campaign trail. I would have thought Miller on Peds. Oh, this is Anthony Joshua. Who's got a big boxing match real tight coming up. So anyway, that's window which I'm going to leave open. This is my inbox. Right, and this is married to my wife's cousin, Linnea, is a mate of mine, lives up in Stockholm, who sent me this ad. Now I'm just going to run through these and just go like, what it is the Web3 Foundation, which was started by Gavin Wood, and Gavin Wood wrote the Ethereum Yellow Paper, and he's a co-founder of Ethereum, which is something I've been working on since 2015, 2016, you know, but my latest work is on Web3, and Gavin has another project called Polkadot, and Web3 seems to be about that. I've been working on IPFS, which is a guy called what's it called, Juan Bennett, who's a I don't know if he's a doctor yet, I don't know whether he's doing a doctorate at Stanford, but IPFS is a super network of computers. Polkadot is proposing another thing, and it's kind of the glue that joins them all together and allows different distributed networks to talk to each other. It's incredibly fascinating, but there are a number of posts which they're recruiting for. My own background isn't in computer programming. My own background is actually in valuation surveying, and the basis of surveying is trigonometry, which is why surveyors crop up across history. Like, for instance, not many people know this, Machiavelli was a surveyor, and he and Leonardo da Vinci knew each other because Leonardo da Vinci used to do a bit of surveying as well for various of the warring princelings around Italy. But the point about my discipline, which is valuation, is that valuation uses, computer modelling for something called sensitivity analysis, risk analysis, and what have you, in portfolio valuations. And I started using something called Monte Carlo analysis back in the mid 80s, before Excel existed. I used to use something called Lotus 123. And in those days, we didn't even have computer terminals on our desk. And I worked for a big oil company, Shell UK, and to do my valuation modelling work at Shell, I actually used to go and I did it with the computer scientists that worked in the data centre at Shell. So I've had an interest in personal computers, not since the 70s, when you used to be able to build your own. I wasn't a member of the computer club at school. We did study basic programming in maths. I don't know if anyone else remembers that it was a sort of a half A3 size textbook, which is just called Basic, with green writing on the front. It's quite a short book, and I can remember we were doing that with computers. We were learning Basic without actual computers in maths. I mean, go figure. But the point about all of that is that when the internet sort of came on the scene, so if you look at the early 80s, mid 80s, through into the 1990s, the BBC computing programmes, and then when the internet came along, this is after Windows really, before the mid-90s, not many people even knew it existed. We're at that point with Web3, is really the point I'm making here. And what the Web3 Foundation say it's doing is it's trying to get people to adopt it more quickly for society to benefit, etc. And Andesh sent me this because I've been looking for something to do. As an entrepreneur, I think what I need to do is start a business, which I've been scratching my head about for a while, and like, what's a sensible thing to start a business in at this stage of what I think is state monopoly capitalism, whereby any competition has been pretty much crowded out of the market as being basically marginalised. That's how I see it anyway. And so figuring out things like a Web3 foundation, what's their motivation, where's this headed, looking at some of the narratives that are highly suspicious of the Internet of Things, and certainly 5G, for instance, where some of the motivations of the more corporate aspects of distributed computing and institution aspects of distributed computing. I mean, Ryan Bannett works at Stanford. Gavin Wood obviously did Ethereum, but if you look at the discussions that he and Vitalik Buterin, who also is a co-founder of Ethereum, have going along, one wonders how their sympathies lie in terms of what I call the non-governmental organisation complex, or sock puppet complex. How in the wild are they? How truly distributed and democratic are these systems? And so at the back of my mind, I like open source computing and free computing, but I look to Richard Stallman as my you know, I mean, he's closer in age to me than, say, Gavin Wood. And I share in common with Richard Stallman a lot of his philosophy. I'm not sure, in fact the jury's out for me on how much of Gavin Wood's philosophy I share. And it does become significant in distributed computing when there are models of hierarchy, leadership and top-down control. And so when you look at consensus algorithms and you look at the consensus within these networks, how democratic are they? There is a thing called machine voting. I mean, Gavin's designed a proportional representation system that you'll find on his personal website, which is fascinating stuff. But what's the underlying philosophy? You know, is there free will in Gavin's world, or is it a deterministic world which he envisions? You know, all points in between, really. And so thanks for this, Andish, and I'm still kind of thinking about it. All these jobs are in a place called Zug in Switzerland, I don't really want to move to Switzerland. I miss the UK a great deal, but I like being left alone in my study in rural Sweden, doing my own thing, and would quite happily work online. In fact, I do quite happily work online, whether that would loosely work as part of this sort of operation, indeed whether or not they'd be interested in me working for them. As I say, I'm not formally trained, and most of these jobs, I noticed, are looking for a lot of postgraduate degrees in various disciplines, and which suggests to me that they want people that think the right way about things rather than think about things outside of the box. And as an outside of the box thinker myself, I don't take kindly to being put in a box, that's true, but the other thing is that as the paradigm moves towards the new paradigm, people are setting boundaries for the next paradigm, which will be a carryover from the current one. And my suspicion about a lot of these foundations is that the gatekeepers are already in place, and the early promise of, say, Bitcoin, which I would say the early false promise, and the early promise of Ethereum, which I don't think was a false promise, but let's remember where these places are, or where these things are actually springing from. Yeah, I am skeptical, I have to say. I am skeptical, not about the technology and not about the good it can do, but in which way it is being directed, and who is doing that directing. That's kind of all I'd say at this point. I'm still considering maybe sending a CV off to these people. You know, as usual, they always say, you know, if your job isn't advertised, they've got to sort of write and tell us about yourself. So anyway, we'll see. But anyway, the Web3 Foundation is hiring, so if anyone else is watching and interesting, the link is going in. Just going to copy that now and put it across. But it is relevant to this whole idea of mass communication, instant communication, consensus, and influencing the outcome of supposedly free votes. That's really the point. So let's just this is on the Reddit page. We're just gonna copy. Let's put this in here. Okay, so that's now saved, so I can close that window. Right, Polkadot. This is Polkadot, which is Gavin Wood's. Yeah, I've been looking at this for a while now. As I say, there's a fascinating fellow, Gavin Wood. These are all the people working on the Polkadot network. Aragon, that's something that I've been using. The Energy Web Foundation, I haven't had a look at that. I will do. I'm just going to copy the link. And just put that in there to have a look at later, because I want to close these windows as I'm going, otherwise I'm there you go. Polkadot, okay. And here we go. This is Gavin Wood's Twitter account. And there are a few things to look at on here. Paste. Now this is interesting. There's a UK Parliament petition where Gavin Wood is obviously supporting revoking Article 50. Now, I don't agree with that. I think that obviously that's related to the Cambridge Analytica questions, and there's another one coming up in a minute about that. And for all his brilliance, you know. And then here we are, there's an exchange between Gavin and PtLocal, where they're discussing venture capital funded models, and why they didn't go with that. And PtLocal said maybe Gavin said something along those lines, and he says no, he didn't. But anyway, that was I'm going to retweet that just out of interest. I mean, I know PtLocal has been courted by people like Bill Gates and what have you, and I'm sure Gavin is fainted and courted, and indeed, you know, I mean, they've given gongs to people who've done a lot less for, you know, cool stuff than Gavin. So anyway, here's evidence that a cool guy can do really uncool stuff. In my, you know, revoking Article 50, it just ain't cool, Gavin. It ain't cool. So that's that. So let's go on to the next one here. Here we are. Right. Teams building at Polkadot, on Polkadot. A number of teams started researching or building Polkadot infrastructure. This is the Web3 Foundation. And here are a list of them. And I had a look at their GitHub and what have you. So let's just put that in here. A Joystream, this is what that's a distributed, a few of these are open, video thing. It was quite an interesting looking at governance and how they do these things. I mean, back in the day there was a thing called the Republic of Doug on YouTube, and there is a depository of it on my GitHub. Done by a Swedish programmer up in the north of Sweden here, which was a very early indication of what could be done by smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain. And for whatever reason, there was a Spanish political theorist that seemed to have been involved, that was interested in community courage, who did a lot of work on that. and there is a community currency. There are several of them actually in my GitHub, so when you look now at distributed computing and what all these different people are doing, to a certain extent, Web3 is just a reinvention of the wheel, but the problem, as I see it, with cryptocurrencies is that they sought to just replicate all the worst parts of finance capitalism and usury, as opposed to concentrating on the things that it truly could be better at. So in a way, it was just exchanging, well, the old song that, you know, meet the old new boss, same as the old boss. And so there's a failure of imagination. The technology isn't a failure of imagination, but there is a failure of imagination as to the uses and possibilities that the new technologies can open up. And part of that is obviously that it can be used for more freedom, or it can be used for less freedom, simply because the information can be distributed in different ways and guided in different ways. And so then we go back to the whole idea of the psychographics and Cambridge Analytica. And so again, you know, is it free will or is it determinism? And so how many degrees of freedom are there? What are the choices in the boundary conditions surrounding the you know, the so-called machine learning algorithms, etc.? I mean, these are all interesting questions, and as I say, our filters are such that a lot of this stuff is quite hard to take in. So this is teams building on Polkadot, and I'm just going to grab a copy of that and put it in my document here as I go along. There she blows. Okay, so right, let's close that one. What are we up to now? Now then, this one, Sparta released how to claim your rewards. I had a good look at this. This is was an interesting become a validator. Now, where was it that I was reading about? It's supposed to be a distributed network, and it's proposing that people with the biggest stakes in a kind of an auction get to be these things they call validators, who decide what can and cannot be published on this network. Now, these council members, and I must say, I found that all a little bit elitist, considering it's called Sparta as well. Sparta famously had two kings who were kept in check by the E4s. And so effectively these guys have got E4s, and the question in classical antiquity always was, so who watches the E4s? Which is not a bad question if you think about it. So there you go. So I'm going to keep that because I wanted to give that some more thought and have a look at that. I mean, it's an early stage coin thing, and part of the thing that has occurred to me with these new platforms is when they come along with a coin attached and all the rest of it, you know, there are something like 1,300 separate coins already, all of which are perfectly fine for doing this stuff if they're convertible into something spendable, and therefore you don't need a token to get these things going. You just don't, because if the technology works, then really so anyway, that's another question about all this stuff, is that if you look at an individual thing as a standalone thing, that's one thing, and therefore you would want your token, and your token in theory gives you independence. But if you look at it as a symbiotic system whereby they're all contributing in an anti-fragile way to the system. I mean, you could argue, well, you know, you could have another coin, you might have another coin. I'm just skeptical that that's the way to go, because there are so many of them, and they all seem to me to do pretty much the same sort of thing, and so as with all these things, there are a million questions about each individual point. Just to get it down on paper, as it were, the point about application-specific use cases for services, sales, hire and use rights or stuff is what you could call the real economy, and tokens is the holding place. The you know, money is merely an IOU. So if you're providing stuff or a service or whatever, at a national level, you know, you're going to deal with the national currency. The way that national currencies are done is not democratic, and it's not fair. So you want to escape from that form of manipulation. Is having your own token a possibility? Well, of course we know it's a possibility, but all these other tokens also exist, and so you have to look at the basis that they come about, and there are three basic ways they come about. There are what they call pre-mined coins, that's a central authority. There are mined coins, and there's kind of like a hybrid between the two. And then you have the idea of going from mining to staking, which is the hybrid that Ethereum has been talking about doing, but has been finding quite hard to do. Now, the question then becomes, in and of themselves, those tokens are tokens, however they're done, however they're brought into existence. All they are manufactured receipts. Stuff is though stuff. You know, the work that you do is work. You can only do that, you know, so many hours in the day, as it were, or there's only, you know, so many bushels of corn produced in 1 year. So if you attach a token to your stuff and you're in control of your own token, how does that then match up against these other tokens? Is it better? Is it worse? Well, actually, it's probably better because it's actually backed by something. But then, how ubiquitous can it become? And so I suppose the question, the point becomes, the people with the stuff need to federate into the tokens, and this is where all my work. I did a lot of work on a proposed federated currency called Lagom, which was looking at the way they did money in the Hanseatic League, and so effectively, what brings value to the tokens is the real Web3 economy, which is the stuff, the services, and all the rest of it, which includes, you know, computer programming and stuff like that, but not the actual tokens. The tokens remain a token. It's not a thing in itself, and that's the the big cleavage between the thinking of what I call the Bitcoin breadheads, as opposed to the Bitcoin entrepreneurs. Like a breadhead is not necessarily an entrepreneur, because they're not doing stuff or a service and making it better and all of that stuff that we're told markets produce with competition and innovation and all this sort of thing. So I found reading this Sparta stuff and Joy and their video platform and how they propose to govern it quite interesting, and I've got to say unconvincing, but it, however unconvincing it was to me, it may be convincing to you, and it remains interesting. They are, you know, it's kind of like a live experimentation. So, but they're also behind the curve, because already there is BitTube, which is doing pretty much the same thing, and Steemit, which is doing pretty much the same thing, which is the challenge that I have for my proposed publishing portal. And what I would say about my proposed publishing portal is it's not going to have its own coin because it doesn't need one. That's on the basis that people using it have got stuff, and they're going to be exchanging that stuff and just accepting that other tokens that exist have value, and basically they can choose the ones that have an immediate exchange value for day-to-day needs, and my own preferred way of then changing my cryptographic value into value to hold is through Volturo to convert it into gold, and when Volturo start doing silver, or someone else does, into silver as well, and holding those two commodity monies, and if someone implemented Bernard Laitier's Terra currency, for instance, I would be very interested in holding Terra, because that's, you know, it's tangible, and it's crypto tokens are intangible, and they only have value as long as people have stuff that they'll accept for them. So if you develop stuff and you're it's the stuff that has the value, and therefore the value in the network are the people who are doing actual stuff. It's a simple point, but it's one that seems to pass so many people by, perhaps because it is such a simple point. So that's that. Then the next window here, we've got to get there's a very interesting sign you're now wearing Sparta, which has someone who's just been kicked in the groin. Right, so where are we now? Parity substrata, there's Gav again, good old Gav. Just put that out. I have got parity on my computer. I'm going to go back and have another look at that another time. A bit of the old cult of personality going on there, Gav. Yes, we can. Very Obama-esque with the colours as well. The biggest bet against chain maximalism. Nerds of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Right, where are we? Let's just copy that link there. We'll come back to that too. dot token, after all I've just been saying about tokens. So much of this stuff is repetition. So much of it is just retreaded money for old rope, it has to be said. And yeah, operation game theory incentivized token holders to behave in honest ways. Good actors are rewarded by this mechanism, while bad actors lose their stake in the network. This ensures the network stays secure. Right, well, I am not a great fan of game theory, I've got to tell you. It is but one view of human nature. I mean, it has developed, but it is the product of one. I mean, that said, I like Schubik's work. I mean, anyway, that's Polkadot. Let's just the reason these things are relevant to Cambridge Analytica and to the narrative behind the narrative is that no one knows where this all ends up or where indeed we're going, but we do know the direction of travel and the direction we're moving in. And so big themes: climate change, carbon currency, 5G, Internet of Things, federalisation right down to the city-state level and getting rid of nations. And really, I mean, in a way, we're turning citizens have been turned into consumers, who in turn with this lot are being turned into hashes. Now, you can look at that one way. I'm not a number, I'm a free man. I'm not a number, I'm a hash. Is a hash the same as a free man? Well, a hash can provide the protections of anonymity, in theory, up to a point. So those are three big themes here, which are emerging as the narrative behind the narrative. What is the overarching direction of travel, and what are the strong currents we can identify in the current narratives on the surface level, to see what's happening sort of, you know, underneath in those currents. Another strong theme that I've come to over the past few months is looking at in this water metaphor, or this body of water, is the idea that the water in the fish tank is being changed, and you know, there's the old maxim that, you know, that the fish doesn't know the water it swims in until you take it away, and in modern commerce, the water we all swim in is money, and we take it for granted. And if the way that money is done is changed, i.e. they're changing the water, which is kind of happening at the moment. And on this point, on my laptop, I did save it. There was a video of Stiglitz telling us all that, well, we should get rid of cryptocurrencies, don't like them at all. And of course the dollar is a wonderful thing, it's done very well, but it should be more digital. It was a disingenuous thing, I must say. Let me just I don't want to open new windows as I'm going along, so all I'm going to say is, at this point, I'm going to just make a note: Stiglitz, get rid of cryptos, Twitter, CNBC segment. I did download, I I know it's on my hard drive, so that's that there. Again, so there you go. Uncle Joe, Joseph Stiglitz. Right, so that's Stiglitz. Polka dot overview. What have we got next? It's my LinkedIn feed is next. 5G versus climate change. That's a question I put to Ranjan myself the other day. There was a bank holiday in Britain yesterday. I might be talking to Ranjan later. Notifications. Mirror tickle over. 8 years of positive money. Positive money. Who have had the putsch by the green NGO complex. Yeah, so there we are. Financial eyes here, 5G. Let's go. That's Ranjan's blog. Some interesting conversations with Ranjan about Extinction Rebellion and other things lately. I'm going to leave that question in there because it is a good question. I did retweet that. They say 5G is very bad for your health and bad for the environment, and for carbon-based life forms, and it's way more damaging to everybody and everything than CO2 in the atmosphere. But, there you go. That's that. Okay. Now that's there. I'm just going to find this Stiglitz thing when that's open, because it's not opening a new window if you just switch one. Because what I did, I know I responded to it because I put the episode of the Greatest Scam, episode 4 of the Hidden Secrets of Money, the Mike Malone thing, so I haven't done much tweeting today. Here it is. That's the one. There she blows. So I'm just gonna. There's my little Stiglitz priest of usury. Get you. Come on, mate. What are we doing here? Wait. Let me just copy that. Because seriously, it's worth watching, but do have your sick bag handy, is all I would say to that. I'll get through these very quick because this is still struggling. Come on. Come on. Oh, so annoying. There we are. Copy link to Twitter. Thank you. And then I'm just going to put that in here. There she blows. Paste. Okay, anyone who stumbles on this stream, I'm just going through to get some windows closed. I've been working on this stuff for about 3 days and I wanted to get some notes down, and this I've found is a good way of doing it. If I stream live and talk, I can then use the transcript as fuller notes to actually refer back to at a later date, etc. So right, that's there, so we'll close that one now. Okay, Mon Money Network. Oh, this is good, this one is. Article by Michael Hudson, a friend sent yesterday. So this is the exponential function. It's much misunderstood and little known. Let's just put what that is about there and close that window. What have we got here? That's the same thing. Right, Sadamaram. Okay, that's on my LinkedIn. This is the guy, the CEO of BitTube. We were just looking at Sparta and Joy and all of that sort of thing. Well, these guys are already there, and I've got a channel on it. It seems to work very well. And if we go up here, look, you can see. Just open this thing up here. Here is the BitTube app in Chrome, and pays tubes for people to watch your videos and videos that you watch, and you can then put them in your wallet and exchange them, and so it's sort of a this is the idea of where you have a service and you have your own coin, and it becomes kind of self-perpetuating. You can mine this coin, and I mean, the mining I get, and I suppose if you're going to do it, you would federate it and you would make your coin exchangeable for any other coins. So for instance, I should be able to buy their coin with another coin that I'm able to mine, which also supports the network, say Ethereum or something else. And that kind of works. It's another layer, but not another layer of complexity, but another layer of subsidiarity in a way, or mutuality. So that's the point, going back to the Sparta thing and the point I was making about real stuff and the tokenization side of things. So people with real stuff can accept tokens, or they can issue tokens. The exchangeability and applicability of those tokens in other stuff-based projects, as opposed to mere token-based or exchange-based products. It's a really interesting question that needs developing a little further, but both Steam and BitTube already have an instance of this, and IPFS have got Filecoin, which is kind of storage, and that sort of works because the storage means that you know that your files are going to be available, and so they will download slightly quicker, or a lot quicker in some cases. So note to self yet again, re-examine my earlier work on Largom and Forez, and the distributed applications with real tangible service and stuff, time and labour, skin in the game things, as opposed to the for a medium that is supposed to disintermediate, a token is really just a intermediary without corporeal form, as it were. It's a digital intermediary as opposed to a trusted third party intermediary, but it's no less controlled who is benefiting from that distributed intermediary token, and it's a question to develop and go back to. So I'm just going to make a note at this point in my notes of that point when we're looking at BitTube. So BitTube, tubes distributed intermediary tokens instead of intermediary institutions or persons, legal fictions or otherwise. So, right, okay, so that's an interesting thought there, and I've connected with Saba Maram on LinkedIn. Cool. So that's that. Next. Okay, so next we have. Oh right, IBPBC roadmap. This is the roadmap for BitTube, or the organisation behind it. Beta version, press release, international launch, bug fixing, display, API, friendly tone, mobile apps, copyright, L detection, content forking system, integrating system exchanges per bit, mobile apps beta, smart TV solutions, they switch from mining to paid. Okay. Right. Let's just put that link in here anyway. Interesting choice of icons there. Sort of interplanetary file system, I suppose. Very droll, very droll. Okay, so next up we have. No, this is Paper.ly. This is my Ethereum newspaper, which generates automatically. In fact, it's thrown up some very interesting articles over the years. Yeah, I read this thing yesterday. Bitcoin testing 6,000 level will justify overall surge in cryptocurrency optimism. I mean, that is like reading tea leaves. This one too, here's why Ethereum is in the early stages of possible mega rally. There is so much nonsense that these people talk. It's divorced from the real stuff in the world and skin in the game. And it goes back to what we're saying about Van Neumann's elephant, which is coming up as well. But anyway, that's the Paper.ly newspaper, which is, it's an interesting way of actually finding different things to read that don't come up in the Google search algorithms or some of the other search engines, so it's served me quite well. It's been coming out for a couple of years now. Right, refined medium, video content blockchain. Now this is the one with the video content, and network of moderators. So this is the network of moderators again. Was this related to Sparta or not? I'm not. It's very similar in its conception, and with what it's trying to do is clearly not going to have first movers advantage, because that is well, there's D tube, there's bit shoot, and there is bit tube, and here it's interesting to note the difference between cloud-based computing and distributed computing. They are different. Cloud-based computing is still a server-based model, albeit with multiple single points of failure as opposed to one point of failure. Distributed computing is potentially has full subsidiarity. Every node, every terminal on the network acting autonomously or in concert. So it's a difference of degree rather than of kind, although in some respects it's a difference of kind. I would say it's more a difference of degree rather than kind. So there we are, refined medium, blah, how it works. I'm just going to get that off there, and let's just put that there. Let's see, this is, they have their own token as well. This interoperability of tokens is a very interesting question. Right, refinemedium.com, this site, so let's just copy that and put it here. Vision, blah blah. The white paper and all of that. We've got what that is, so we're just going to close these windows, and I mean, I started reading this. They're based in Hong Kong, these people, and I don't know if it's just a language thing, but I found it